Joining us on Bottom Line is Chris Chung, the CEO of the North Carolina Economic Partnership, the public part of the public-private partnership that's helping bring jobs and businesses to North Carolina. Chris, thanks for joining us on Bottom Line.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Good to see you.
Well, first off, tell us a little bit about the partnership. What role does it play? How is it structured? What does it do to help North Carolina bring jobs to the state?
Sure. So the partnership was created a little bit more than 3 years ago. I've been with the organization since January of 2015, and it was created really to take over a number of functions that were formerly housed within the State Department of Commerce. I know you all had Secretary Copeland on here a few weeks ago, but we were created as a nonprofit that contracts with the Department of Commerce to perform a number of these economic development functions at a state level that used to be housed in that agency. It's a very similar trend to what you see in about, I think, 18 other states at this point in the U.S. Business recruitment is probably the most high-profile aspect of what we do, but we also work with existing employers, helping them to grow. We help North Carolina companies grow their export sales to overseas markets. We're even responsible for tourism promotion. So all of those efforts to attract vacationers and leisure travelers to North Carolina, those are also directed within our organization. But it's simply migrating those duties that used to be within state government more to a nonprofit public-private model.
And how is this working in the new administration? I know when Secretary Copeland from Commerce was here, he seemed happy with the change, but a little bit reluctant that Commerce didn't have as many functions as it had in the past. Are you working as well with the Democratic administration as the Republicans under McCrory?
Yeah, it's been really a great productive relationship so far, and you would expect that it would have to be, right? I mean, the Secretary, the Governor, they're absolutely key to any of those efforts that we have, especially when it comes to trying to recruit companies here or help some of our existing companies choose to expand here versus somewhere else. Consider the Governor and the Secretary, that's the heavy artillery, and there is absolutely a time in just about every major recruitment deal where you've got to have the heavy artillery absolutely engaged. Governor Cooper, Secretary Copeland, their entire team have been engaged really from even before Governor Cooper took office on January 1st. Even during that transition time, they were already reaching out saying, what are the deals that we have to be aware of, and how can we help get these deals across the goal line?
Chris, we talk a lot about recruitment and expansion, especially on projects and companies that come from out of state. But you mentioned something which I think has a lot of interest, and we have been writing about this for years, which is how is the state helping existing businesses? Sure. You said that that's part of your function.
Yes.
Could you give us any specifics as to how do you typically help existing businesses, sure, or perhaps some guidance to people that are watching that, sure, you know, oh, I did not know EDPNC has that for me?
Sure. Well, let's keep in mind that companies that we're trying to recruit here to the state benefit just as much from a positive, strong, competitive business climate as do companies who have been here for 10, 20, or 50 years. So a good business climate, which includes things like infrastructure, good education systems, competitive tax rates, those things are all very important, no matter to a company that's just new to North Carolina or that they've been here for a very long time. That said, in terms of how we actually go out there and engage with the existing business community, we have a number of individuals who are housed across the state. They work frequently with their local economic development partners to reach out to companies who are already here in North Carolina. And oftentimes it's a simple conversation like this, trying to understand what are the issues that are holding up that company from continuing to grow further here in the state, and what are the solutions and resources that we can help get in front of that company so that they can accelerate that expansion in North Carolina. Workforce is one of those issues that we consistently hear about. A lot of companies are always trying to think, how do I continue to make sure I've got access to the trained, educated workforce that I need to be a successful company? So we'll introduce some of the community college resources or other workforce development institutions that can help them with that aspect.
That is an interesting, we do talk about the labor and the workforce. What are you seeing? I mean, how are we doing as a state in terms of when companies come calling and asking, like, okay, give me the blueprint?
Well, it's a tight labor market. I mean, I think anyone looking at national unemployment rates, state unemployment rates, you'd have to acknowledge that right now we're in a part of the economic cycle where it's probably an employee's market versus an employer's market. And that's a dramatic change from where we were as recently as 7 or 8 years ago.
But the wages are still sort of not growing.
They are, but it's a tight market. And I think most companies that we talk to recognize it's a tight market. I think one thing North Carolina has going for it and has really had going for it for the better part of the last quarter century is a constant flow of in-migration into the state. We are one of the fastest growing states, continue to be. We leapfrogged Michigan a couple of years ago to become the 9th largest state in the country. Our population growth rate is double that of the national average. All of you who live here or from here, you know that we've seen this constant influx of Northeasterners, Midwesterners, and people really from all over the United States. What that speaks to is a talent pool that's consistently replenishing itself, as well as adding to it from outside of the state. So that's a powerful message that I think resonates with companies across many, many different industries that we talk to.
Well, as the representative of the private side of this private-public partnership, you recognize the process of economic development is political in its nature, like any function of government. There is a historical sense that the value proposition is cutting a ribbon in front of a factory where several hundreds of people will be employed. But in a new modern global economy, sometimes those types of industries don't exist in quite that same way that deliver the political benefit of whatever the strategy has been for economic development. We're feeling that here in North Carolina in terms of the rural-urban divide, where parts of the state simply can't compete for the type of big box employers that once existed. What is the strategy for the state to try to attract these new, different economy-oriented jobs that maybe all the employees do this for a living?
Sure. I mean, I always take the opportunity to remind people that economic development is more than just recruiting new companies here. Even though that's a very high-profile part of our mission, it's not the only way that communities can, no matter where in North Carolina or outside of North Carolina, it's not the only way that communities can grow their economy. If you're helping your existing companies to expand, that's another way that you can bring new jobs and investment in. If you're helping your companies be more successful finding new customers globally, that revenue is going to flow back in and enable that company to invest and grow. Even if you're helping individuals to start businesses, or if you're a tourism-based economy, those are also ways that economies can develop, and that reflects the mission that the EDPNC has across all 5 of those core functions that I talked about. That said, yeah, absolutely. Every industry changes. Industries become much more automated, more capital investment intensive. I think a big challenge for us is always going to be, what are the industries that we proactively target? Are these industry sectors that have a good chance of looking across as broad of a swath of North Carolina as possible? And do we have the assets that match up with what those companies are looking for? That's an iterative process that will never end. Having done this in 2 other states over a career of 20 years, I can tell you, you have to try to evolve as best as you can with the changing needs of private industry.
So we did ask the same question to the Commerce Secretary as well. How much do you hear about companies asking about rural North Carolina?
So I think it depends on the industry sector, right? I think a biotechnology company or an information technology company, a financial service or corporate headquarters company is going to have a very different set of needs than maybe a manufacturer, a food processing company, even a distribution center or a data center. Different companies, different industries all have their own calculus for how they approach their location decision. Our job is really to try to put as much of North Carolina into play as that company's parameters will allow them to be.
What was that? 73% of the jobs created went to metro counties in North Carolina.
If you look at, if that's for aggregate job creation, that would make sense because that's where a lot of the population is. When we track our own metrics, we look at our pipeline of activity, including successes involving recruiting companies or helping existing companies expand. About 2/3 of the wins that we've had in the past 2.5 years, again, recruitment victories as well as expansion victories, 2/3 of those are in what we call Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties, which tend to be more rural areas of the state. So again, a lot of our activity tends to be skewed more towards manufacturing industries. That may account for how that ratio is set up. But really, for us, we see companies of all different sizes from all different parts of the world. Our job is to try to get as much of North Carolina into consideration as possible, recognizing that that company is always going to have its own needs.